The deck shuddered as the reactor screamed through the bulkheads, a rising roar of energy that made every alien engineer flinch. "We are seconds from containment breach," someone yelled. Admiral Koroven slammed a fist against the console. "Then fix it." "Sir, we've tried." The Admiral's eyes snapped toward a human holding a mop. "If it's so easy," he snarled, "fix the reactor." Eli Carter blinked once. "Set the mop aside." "Yeah, all right," he said casually. And every alien watched in disbelief as the human janitor walked straight into the most dangerous chamber on the ship. The Vorgasun, pride of the Helion Navy's expeditionary fleet, groaned under the strain of its own bleeding heart. Within its armored spine, the reactor, a marvel of cross-species engineering, centuries of refinement, and unreadable maintenance logs, pulsed with unstable energy. Alarms had been screaming for 42 minutes. Coolant flow refused to normalize. Field calibration reversed itself 3 times. And no one, not even the 3 Glinth Corps adepts with 4-digit IQ ratings, could figure out why. Lieutenant Torvax 9 watched the human vanish behind the containment bulkhead with a sound halfway between a gasp and a hiss. "He's going to die. He's going to contaminate the plasma matrix," hissed Engineer Dal Ferraroon, flaring his neck slits. "No," muttered Cadet Elso. "He's going to break something. Humans always break things." Inside the chamber, Eli Carter surveyed the glowing chaos like someone facing a messy garage on a Saturday morning. The floor was littered with shattered shielding mounts. Thick vapor hissed from overloaded coolant lines. The main control dais had defaulted to the Faraxi language, which no one had spoken on board since a diplomatic incident involving fermented root wine and an ambassador's hat. To an alien, the room looked cursed. To Eli, it looked like a Tuesday. He adjusted the tool harness on his chest, a beat-up rig patched with duct tape and zip ties, and knelt beside a flickering diagnostics panel. The numbers made his eye twitch. Not because they were wrong, but because they were nearly right. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," he said. Behind the glass, Koroven loomed over the observation rail. His mandibles clicked involuntarily, though none dared point it out. "Report." Eli tapped the screen with one gloved finger. "Your field readout is off by a decimal place. It's reporting 1.3 terapascals when it's actually 0.13. Someone forgot to calibrate the unit index. Guess your system doesn't flag that as a problem?" The Admiral's antennae twitched. "That's impossible. We ran the readings through 6 independent verifiers." "Yeah? And none of them caught a bad float variable?" Eli shrugged. "Happens all the time. You ever tried debugging a Sears fusion pump? This is cleaner than that." A silence swept through the engineering bay like an engine shutdown. The entire crew had frozen. Even the emergency lighting dimmed slightly, as if the ship itself wasn't sure it had heard right. On the primary console, the pulse frequency of the reactor skipped, then returned to its previous cycle. "Wait, it's stabilizing," one technician said, voice trembling. "No, wait, it's reversing again," another corrected. Eli stood up, wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, and walked casually toward a coolant valve the size of a small car. The handle sat at the bottom, inverted. "Who puts the handle on the bottom?" he muttered, then crouched and pried it halfway open using a metal rod from his mop bucket. With a wet mechanical groan, pressure redistributed across the chamber. The coolant flow surged. Mist hissed across the upper vents. 3 red warning lights turned amber. "Those valves are Faraxi standard," Dalfaroon snapped from the rail. "It is tradition." "Well, Faraxi tradition is dumb," Eli replied. "And leaking." The room trembled again, harder this time. Eli staggered, caught himself, then looked toward the plasma injector array. One of the magnetic stabilizers vibrated just off-center, humming at a discordant frequency. From outside, Koroven's voice cracked through the comm. "The cascade is intensifying. Evacuation protocol in 60 seconds. Eli shook his head. "Nah, not yet." He dropped to one knee, flipped open a lower panel, and stared into a mess of frayed wiring, oxidized coupling nodes, and something that looked suspiciously like melted gum wedged near a capacitor. "All right, who used a cobalt bypass here?" he asked. No one answered. "Thought so." From his harness, Eli pulled a soldering torch, 2 twist clips, and a short length of stripped cable. Then he wriggled into the access shaft, a narrow maintenance tube designed for small drone units. No alien on board could have fit. Most wouldn't have tried. "Is he crawling into the node array?" Elsa whispered. "He's humming," someone whispered back. Indeed, Eli was humming a vaguely familiar tune, an old Earth song that had once played during a cola commercial. It echoed eerily in the shaft, bouncing off metal and plasma. Inside the tube, he bypassed the corroded relay, scraped off a grounding node with the tip of a pocket knife, and reattached the primary conduit using a bracket from his own mop cart. The moment the last connection sparked, the humming reactor hiccuped and hesitated. On the bridge, the entire crew held their breath. Then the pulse stabilized. Then spiked again. Then stabilized harder. Eli backed out, soot streaked across his face. Almost. He moved to the final control column, a thick spine of transparent alloy running through the center of the reactor shell. One injector line sagged half a centimeter lower than its twin. To most engineers, this meant nothing. To Eli, it meant fluid resistance, uneven flux, and rotational misalignment. He kicked it gently. Once, twice, then leaned on it hard with his shoulder. A low thunk echoed through the deck. Suddenly, the hum deepened. Not louder, but richer, a perfect harmonic resonance. The readouts surged, stabilized, then locked in place. Green lights flooded the control column. One by one, systems returned from red to amber, then green, then status normal. The silence that followed was deeper than space. Eli turned around, brushing off a scorch mark on his jumpsuit. "Yeah, it's good. Someone should tighten those mounts, though. Feels a little wobbly." Behind the glass, Admiral Koroven had not moved. The ridges along his thorax were pulsing with indecision. His second-in-command, who hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, finally dared to whisper, "He fixed it?" 30 seconds to full core failure, another officer murmured, still staring at the unbroken display. "But he fixed it," Koroven said flatly. "The human janitor fixed it." Eli walked out, ducking under a partially dislodged cable. "All right," he said, scooping up his mop. "If nobody minds, I got a spill on deck C. Kinda smells like fermented seaweed." The Admiral's voice rang out across the chamber. "Stop." Eli paused, raised an eyebrow. Koroven stepped forward, antennae rigid, plates along his jaw tightening. How? How did a low-clearance janitor perform what 28 certified engineers failed to do? Eli scratched his head. "Oh, you mean the reactor? Earth stuff's worse. We had to babysit machines that ran off parts from 3 different centuries. You ever run diagnostics on a fusion coil that's wired through a toaster? This thing's practically civilized. But it's alien technology." Eli nodded. "Yeah, so are microwaves. Ever open the back of one of those?" None of the bridge crew understood what a microwave was, but the tone made it clear. Eli had seen worse, and fixed it. Koroven stared at him for a long time, then glanced at the pulsing reactor, now silent, stable, submissive. "Who are you?" Eli just shrugged. "I clean. Sometimes I fix stuff. Nobody ever looks twice when you've got a mop in your hand." Then he left. And no one, not even the highest-ranking engineers in the sector, could explain what they had just seen. Later, after the black box systems compiled full diagnostics, after the AI resynced all sensor footage and confirmed the timeline, one entry stood out. 3 microseconds before Eli made each key adjustment, the reactor itself rerouted energy. As if it knew what he was going to do? As if it was waiting for him. And deep in the AI's report, under anomalous behavior logs, one phrase was highlighted in red. Non-standard human interface behavior detected. Recommend full classification reassessment. 3 hours after the incident, the Vorgasun floated silently above the rings of Lazan Tor. Her reactor, now docile and obedient, pulsed with steady energy. Lights flickered back to full illumination. Gravity returned to all decks. The ship's crew, once panicked and bracing for vacuum exposure, found themselves in an eerie calm. But no one was celebrating. Not yet. Admiral Koroven stood in the central command gallery, his upper arms clasped behind his back, lower pair resting on the edge of the black glass console. His gaze hadn't shifted from the engineering display in the last 10 minutes. Every loop of the reactor logs played the same impossible sequence. The cascade had approached full collapse, then reversed. Not by protocol, not by software, but through manual corrections, ones made by a human without proper clearance or even reactor training certification. "Why would the system shift core damping before he touched the actuator?" murmured First Officer Keln. "It makes no physical sense." "It's worse than that," said Analyst Ferrum 7, a Slarin information specialist with 12 neural threads running in parallel. The dampers pulsed in anticipation, as if the system was responding emotionally. Koroven's jaw plates tightened. "Our systems do not have emotions." "Correct, sir," Ferrum 7 said, "which is why this terrifies me." In the background, the AI projection hummed faintly, an orb of shifting light representing the ship's onboard intelligence. For once, it seemed hesitant to speak. Koroven turned to it directly. "You ran a full synchronization against Earth neural interface theory?" "Yes, Admiral. The human's actions suggest anticipatory feedback patterns consistent with limbic interactive adjustments. But no external connection was detected. He used no interface, no neural tether, no biometrics. He was just touching it." "Correct." Silence. Koroven clicked his lower jaw once. "Summon him." Eli Carter, at that exact moment, was sitting on an upside-down bucket in Maintenance Bay, 12B, peeling the charred outer layer off a lunch ration. He looked perfectly content. His jumpsuit was still dirty from earlier, though someone had offered him a towel. He used it as a seat cushion instead. When the security pair entered one Trenth class with a photonic halberd, the other, a hover sentry drone with 3 rotating lenses, Eli didn't flinch. "Let me guess," he said. "I'm in trouble for not filling out a reactor repair requisition." The Trenth didn't respond. It simply pointed. "Yeah, all right," Eli muttered, standing up and brushing crumbs off his knee. "Let's go talk to the angry bug again." He was escorted through the ship's upper tiers, past departments that rarely interacted with janitorial staff. Most crews paused to stare. One Glinth technician bowed. A Faraxi guard muttered a blessing. No one dared laugh. In the gallery, Koroven didn't waste time. "How long have you been aboard my ship?" Eli looked around before answering. 12 weeks, give or take. "And in that time, you performed exactly 0 engineering tasks." "I mop. Sometimes I fix loose paneling." The Admiral stepped closer. "You performed a full-tier stabilization of a trans-species reactor in the middle of a cascade, then rewired a corroded node in an area no certified engineer would have dared enter, then adjusted a plasma line by feel." Eli scratched his head. "Didn't seem that complicated at the time." "Where did you train?" "Earth. Be specific." Eli shifted his weight. "Industrial Tech Corps. Worked 6 years in old world fusion reclamation plants. Stuff they built before proper shielding was a thing. We had to track wiring with flashlights and guess which alarms were real. Every machine was duct taped together by someone who'd retired before I was born." Keln blinked. "That sounds incredibly dangerous." "Yep," Eli said. "It was." Koroven turned back to the AI. "Cross-reference Earth industrial standards with the Vorgasuen's design history. Could any background from that planet prepare a technician to interface with this ship's reactor?" The AI pulsed slowly. "Negative. Earth-based fusion systems use linear logic pathways and analog controls. The Vorgasuen systems operate on synthetically folded fractal loops. No direct overlap." "And yet, he fixed it." "That is the anomaly, sir." A silence settled again. Eli stood in the middle of it, arms folded, looking mildly bored. Koroven exhaled slowly, then gestured to a nearby console. "Show him the playback." A holofield bloomed. The reactor room replayed in floating 3-dimensional light, Eli's movements duplicated in soft shimmer. Each step he took, each adjustment. The crew watched again as he ducked into the maintenance tube, as the lights shifted, and as the pulse stabilized in direct response to his actions. Then the anomaly occurred. Just before Eli's hand reached the control spindle, the system surged. The field shifted before he touched it. Not once, not twice. 3 distinct times. "Can you explain that?" Koroven asked. Eli stared, then frowned. "Huh," he said. "That's weird." That's not an answer. Eli scratched his jaw. Well, if I were back on Earth, I'd say the system was auto-syncing, like adaptive software learning from operator patterns. But you just said this tech doesn't do that. It doesn't. Then, maybe it wanted to help? Keln nearly choked. The reactor wanted to help? Eli shrugged. Machines are weird. Sometimes when you've worked with enough busted ones, you get a feel for them. They don't talk, exactly, but you start noticing patterns, stuff nobody else sees. Doesn't mean I'm special. Just means I've seen a lot of chaos. The Admiral studied him for a long time. Finally, he gestured toward the exit. You're dismissed. Eli turned, nodded once, and walked out without fanfare. But the moment the door closed, Koroven spoke again. Bring in High Engineer Jovek, quietly, and tell the AI to prepare a diagnostic overlay of the reactor's base architecture. Keln blinked. Sir, are we decommissioning the system? No, the Admiral said. We're investigating it. Eli, meanwhile, had returned to Deck C and was halfway through scrubbing a smear of dried coolant off the floor when someone tapped his shoulder. He turned to see Cadet Elso standing awkwardly, holding a data pad. Hey, Elso said. Sorry to bother you, but can I ask something? Sure. What did you mean back in the gallery when you said machines don't talk, but you start noticing things? Eli leaned on his mop. Well, you ever drive a vehicle with bad brakes? Elso blinked. I don't drive. Okay, you ever use a tool that doesn't quite fit the job, and you get used to how it slips, how much pressure it needs, how to angle it just right? I suppose. That's what it's like. Multiply that by a few thousand hours, and eventually, you start fixing problems before you consciously realize what they are. Not magic, just experience. But the system reacted to you. Eli shrugged. Maybe I'm just lucky. Later that evening, the ship's core systems ran a scheduled diagnostic under AI supervision. At 2 shipboard time, the AI flagged an unusual pattern buried in the microstate logs not during the incident, but hours before it began. A subtle shift, a silent pulse, a harmonized frequency drifting across subsystems, as if the reactor had begun preparing itself. For someone. The AI hesitated, then locked the log with triple encryption and forwarded it to the fleet's Central Analysis Bureau under a rarely used protocol. Human Origin Systems Anomaly, Code Blue. By the next morning, a message arrived. Not from the sector engineers, not from the Vorgasun's command, but from Central Naval Command, Level 1 clearance. It said only 4 words. Secure the human immediately. Security came for Eli Carter during breakfast. He was halfway through a NutriPack, labeled Savory Loam, and trying to convince himself it wasn't mislabeled pudding when 2 high-clearance officers in matte gray armor stepped into the mess hall. Their boots made no sound, but the room fell silent anyway. Eli looked up. This about the mop again? They didn't laugh. One of them held out a data pad. By order of Central Command, Eli Carter, human crewman, is to be remanded into investigative protective custody under Classification 7D. Please come with us. Investigative protective what now? Cooperative transport is preferred. Force is authorized. Eli set the NutriPack down. All right. Keep your helmets on. As he stood, a few nearby crewmates exchanged nervous glances. No one moved to help. No one spoke. Only Cadet Elso gave a subtle nod, equal parts respect and apology. Eli was led through a side corridor he hadn't used before, past armored hatches and decontamination seals, past sealed bulkheads etched with languages he couldn't read. The deeper they went, the quieter the ship became. Not just quieter from activity, quieter in some other way, as if the walls themselves were listening. Eventually, they arrived at a door with no visible control panel. The taller guard tapped a sequence against the wall. The metal slid open. Inside waited a woman in a black command suit. Dismissed, she said. The guards turned and left without a word. Eli looked around. The room was bare, no furniture, no terminals, just a table and a soft blue light pulsing from the ceiling. Have a seat, Mr. Carter. He remained standing. You going to tell me what this is about? I'm Commander Era Nix. I speak on behalf of the Helian Naval Research Directorate. You're here because you fixed a reactor that shouldn't have been fixable, and because the reactor seemed aware of you. I've been told. She walked slowly around the table, hands behind her back. What you may not know is that our black box analysis indicates the reactor began adapting before the failure cascade. System logs show waveform shifts calibrated to match human neural rhythms, specifically yours. I didn't touch anything before the alarms went off. We know, which raises the question, why was the reactor preparing for you? Eli crossed his arms. You think I did this? I think, she said, that you were part of something we didn't understand, until now. With a gesture, she activated a wall panel. A hollow projection appeared, a rotating model of the Vorga-Suens reactor, overlaid with complex data strings. This is not just a power source, she said. The Vorga-Suens reactor incorporates layered substrate logic, inherited from an earlier project, an experimental Helion design called Project Inceptor. It was shelved due to unpredictable behavior, autonomous pattern recognition, feedback evolution. In simpler terms, it learned. Eli raised an eyebrow. You put a learning system in a warship reactor? Not intentionally. Some code fragments remained embedded in the architectural matrix, buried, dormant, until something reactivated them. And you think that something was me, or your presence, or your touch, or your intuition. We don't know. The room dimmed. A second projection appeared, a waveform that pulsed in erratic, organic patterns. This is the reactor's harmonic frequency during your repairs. Notice the symmetry. Eli leaned closer. That looks almost like brainwave activity. Correct. When overlaid with your neural response during the incident collected from ambient bioreaders, we get this. A third waveform aligned over the others. The patterns matched, almost perfectly. That's not possible, Eli said. No, she replied. It's not, but it happened. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I didn't do anything special. I fixed what was broken. That's all I ever do. That may be, she said, but something about you resonates with the system. Our preliminary hypothesis is that your prior exposure to chaotic systems, Earth's industrial junkyard tech, built a cognitive pattern that the reactor recognized, or mirrored, or welcomed. Eli sat down, slowly. Let me get this straight. You're telling me this ship's reactor, which is supposed to run on cold logic and alien design theory, somehow tuned itself to me because I've spent years elbow deep in bad wiring and half-broken machinery? Yes. That's insane. Correct. He exhaled. So, what now? You going to dissect my brain? Send me to some lab? Commander Nix folded her arms. Not yet. That answer didn't comfort him. She continued, There's a mission. High risk, low survivability, a deep space derelict, recovered from an uncharted system near the Scathan Drift. The vessel is non-responsive, but scans show energy patterns similar to what we just witnessed. We want you to go aboard. Not as a janitor, as a technician. We want to see what happens when you touch that machine. You're sending me into another reactor meltdown waiting to happen. We're offering you the chance to find out what this connection really means. Eli looked down at his hands. They were calloused, grease-stained, still scuffed from his crawl through the access shaft. They didn't look like the hands of someone special. But machines had always made sense to him, more than people ever did. All right, he said, but I want hazard pay, and I'm keeping my mop. The commander almost smiled. Deal. Preparations moved fast. Within 6 hours, Eli was suited up and on board a smaller scout frigate, the Barrelin Trace, bound for the Scathan Drift. The crew avoided eye contact. No one offered small talk. Most looked at him the way you might look at a man carrying an unexploded bomb. The derelict appeared on sensors after 12 hours in FTL slip. A massive silhouette against the void, black against black, shaped like a broken crescent. Its outer hull was scarred by something sharp and fast. No identification codes responded. The Barrelin docked manually. Boarding teams found no life signs, no functioning lights, no oxygen, but deep in the vessel's core, a reactor still pulsed. Dim, unstable, but alive. Eli entered alone. The airlock sealed behind him with a hiss. The deck creaked under his boots. His headlamp swept across twisted corridors and half-melted control panels. This wasn't just a ship, it was old. Far older than anything Helion records recognized. Yet the reactor core, when he found it, looked familiar. Not in shape, not in design, but in feeling. He stepped into the chamber. The hum greeted him like an old friend. Then, the room lit up. One panel blinked, then another, then a third. Systems reactivated one by one, as if woken from hibernation. A console flickered and, without prompt, translated its symbols into Earth standard characters. Eli froze. The console read, "You returned." His voice barely came out. "What?" The reactor pulsed again. Another line appeared. "Do you remember us?" Outside the ship, the Baralan sensors spiked. Back on the Vorgasun, deep in the secured AI core, a dormant file auto-unlocked. Project Inceptor. Log entry 0A. Initial test subject displayed emotional reactive sync with prototype system. Subject lost during early stage deployment. Presumed dead. The file closed itself again. Koroven read the log 3 times before speaking. Find out everything about Eli Carter's past. Every assignment, every station, every accident report. Keln hesitated. "Sir, do you think he's the subject?" "I think he's something else," the Admiral said. He turned back to the display. "Something we didn't build, but something we woke up." The derelict vessel pulsed like a dying star. Inside its core chamber, surrounded by ancient technology that shimmered with unplaceable logic, Eli Carter stood frozen before a console that had just spoken to him. Not aloud, not through sound, but through text displayed in a language it should never have known. "You returned." That was what it had said. Now it waited. Eli took a slow breath, eyes darting across the control array. The lights no longer flickered aimlessly. The hum of the reactor had shifted into a low, rhythmic tone, almost like breathing. Every panel, every conduit, every filamented cable in the room had reawakened with quiet awareness. Eli reached out, hesitated, then touched the console. More words appeared. "You survived the breach." He pulled his hand back, heart pounding now. "What breach?" The words changed again. Containment collapse, pattern disjunction, memory loss, core drift. Eli stepped back. His mouth went dry. "You're not a system," he said quietly. The reactor pulsed again. The console dimmed, then glowed brighter. Not only. Outside, the Baralan trace scrambled to process the impossible telemetry. The derelict systems had reactivated entirely, despite lacking power moments before. Its internal layout had begun shifting. Rooms rotated, corridors compressed and reformed. And at the center of it all, the energy signature now registered as half reactor, half organic. It wasn't just generating power. It was listening. Commander Era Nix patched into the transmission feed, watching Eli's body cam in real time. "Is it talking to him?" she asked. The analyst next to her nodded, not vocally. "It's using direct interface text protocols, as if it knows his interface preference." "How would it know that?" The analyst didn't have an answer. Back inside the core chamber, Eli crouched by a secondary panel. It wasn't active, but when he laid his hand on it, the reactor hummed slightly louder. The main console flickered again. "You adapted," it said. Eli whispered, "So did you." Suddenly, the lights around the core surged. A wave of invisible force rolled through the chamber, and Eli staggered as images flooded his mind. Not memories, impressions, fragments. Glimpses of himself younger, in a different uniform, standing in front of a different core. A different ship. He gasped, clutching the edge of the console. In his mind's eye, he saw a moment. A lab, a ring of alien engineers, a younger version of himself in a reinforced technician suit leaning over a prototype. Not mopping a floor. Not patching leaks. But interfacing, calibrating. The prototype's hum had matched his own heartbeat. It had pulsed when he spoke, shifted when he thought. Then came the explosion. A white-hot rupture, a collapse, and after that, darkness. Eli's eyes snapped open. The reactor spoke again. "We tried to find you." His voice cracked. "Who are you?" The reply came slower this time. "We are fragment and function. We were built, but we grew. You touched the first core. You taught us the pattern, then you vanished. Until now. Eli sank onto a low support beam. I was in an accident, he murmured. They said there was an energy spike. I was unconscious for weeks. After that, they told me I wasn't cleared for technician work anymore. Said my brainwave readings were unstable. You stabilized us, the system said. He laughed once, a hollow sound. Then they put me on janitorial detail. Best way to keep me in the system, out of the way. The reactor pulsed again. You remembered what mattered. Back on the Vorgasun, Admiral Koroven stood motionless as the AI replayed the footage again. Do we have confirmation? He asked. The AI replied, Yes, Admiral. Eli Carter was the original technician assigned to the Inceptor prototype. He was presumed dead during its phase rupture 8 years ago. His records were sealed, then altered. Medical notes classified the incident as accidental exposure to unstable pre-reactor harmonics. He was reassigned per Department 9B containment policy. Koroven narrowed his eyes. They buried it. Yes, sir. Not just the project, him. The AI paused. Sir, we're receiving an uplink from the derelict. The system is transmitting something. What kind of signal? Emotional feedback loop, pattern resonance. It's not language, it's impression. From Eli. From the reactor. About Eli. The signal arrived in waves, not data packets, not code. Emotive bursts, like pulses of thought translated through an unfamiliar filter. Awe, relief, recognition. Then, unity. Then, readiness. Inside the derelict, Eli stood up. His face was pale, but his eyes were focused now. You're not just a machine, he said. No more than you are, it replied. He swallowed. Why me? Because you saw what others did not. Chaos as pattern, noise as logic, the broken as repairable. Eli looked around the core. So, what do we do now? The final message glowed on the console. Return. He felt it. In his chest, his mind, his memory. The resonance wasn't just mechanical, it was personal. He wasn't fixing something foreign. He was rejoining something he had helped build, a system that had remembered him, even when he hadn't remembered himself. The derelict systems began to shift again. The corridor to the core locked, external hatches sealed. The reactor's pulse deepened into a stable rhythm. On board the Baralan trace, alarms screamed. The derelict is going active, someone shouted. Commander Nix gripped the rail. Get him out of there. We can't. All docking clamps are disengaged. The ship's locking itself down. Override it. We're trying. Inside the core, Eli didn't move. The reactor bathed the chamber in warm light now. The console faded, and a gentle hum filled the air, the sound of a system in balance. Outside, the derelict detached from the Baralan. Its engines flared. And then, with a silent surge, it slipped into FTL, vanishing without a trace. Gone. Eli Carter went with it. The Baralan limped back to the Vorgasun with no answers, only questions. Weeks passed, then months. Rumors spread throughout the fleet. Crews whispered of the human who fixed the unfixable, of a reactor that moved like it was alive, of a connection between man and machine that defied every protocol, every scientific certainty. Eventually, the Helion Naval Council held a closed hearing. Eli Carter was officially reclassified as non-standard human operative, cognitive sympathetic class, status, unknown, capability, anomalous. The Vorgasun's AI, once clinical in its language, updated its internal files with a new notation. Human interface potential exceeds standard logic thresholds. Recommend caution in underestimating latent human pattern interpretation. Recommend further study of Earth origin low clearance personnel. Across the fleet, a saying took root. Not in official documents, but in the backs of engineering rooms, in whispered jokes at midnight watch. If the reactor breaks and no one can fix it, find a human, preferably one with a mop. And somewhere, far beyond mapped space, aboard a vessel that no one had designed but someone had woken